let's look at a flow chart about a life cycle. Again, I'm going to say this many times when we're looking at graphs. Please do not worry about the words that you cannot see. This is not about you understanding this particular flow chart. You will never see this flow chart in the IELTS test because it's an old one. Okay, so don't worry about that. I will say the words you need to know. Okay, so when we first see the life of a salmon, we see there are three main stages, 1, 2, 3, that take places in three main locations, upper river, lower river, and open sea, over a period of 10 years, or a 10-year period. So, So you can see here we have 5 to 6 months, 4 years, and 5 years. So I'm just saying 10 years because we're not going to say 9 years and 5 to 6 months. That just would not be natural there. Okay, over a 10-year location. So this is just a summary. So for this, we're summarizing some of the key aspects. How many stages? There are other things you could talk about, but I think those are three things. We've covered how many stages, how many locations, and how long, all in one nice sentence for our BP1. Now, for these kind of things, for a flowchart, the BP1 can be nice and short like that, just one good sentence, not a short sentence, one good long sentence, because describing that whole life cycle or the whole process will actually take quite a long time. So the next thing I would say is we describe that process. As for the life cycle itself, the salmon starts as eggs born in the slow-moving upper river, where they remain for 5 to 6 months, hatching and then becoming fry. So these are fry. Then the fry, which are 3 to 8 centimeters long, move along the lower river, where they spend about 4 years. After that, okay, so normally this is pretty easy for most students that I've had before. You've probably studied, that step by step. I would recommend you don't just say first, second, third, but rather it starts with this, after that, then, finally. So using some different language like this. Okay. Other kinds of diagrams. Now, there are so many different kinds of diagrams, but one of the most common one is to compare two things. So here we're comparing the wave coming in to the wave going out. Here we're comparing the normal weather conditions and El Nino. El Nino is a weather pattern where about every 7 years there's a big shift in the wind coming in and out from the Pacific Ocean between South America and Asia and Australia. And it really changes the weather. Okay, so this one here is comparing a common house design in cold weather versus warm weather. So let's have a look at one. So again, diagram, we might look at the equipment, the materials, the size, pretty much what we did before. For this one, we would say that these two diagrams describe how electricity is produced from waves, and the first diagram shows how electricity is produced by waves coming in, while the second one describes waves going out. After that, you would say both use the same equipment, which includes a chamber, column, turbine, and actually pretty much chamber, turbine, and column alongside the cliff or sea wall. So you talk about where this equipment is and maybe what the equipment is. So what is the equipment and the location of the equipment, kind of thing. After that, very, very simple BP2. That would be saying when the wave comes in, the air is pushed up through the column, turning the turbine to generate the electricity. When the wave comes out, the air comes down through the column, but the turbine continues to turn in the same direction with the electricity being generated without the turbine having to stop. Okay, because it's turning in the same direction. That's a fairly simple one. I've pretty much said everything you can possibly describe about this. If you wanted, in the BP1, you could describe the fact that the chamber has a bit of space there. You can't say why that is. I think that might be to allow a little bit of air to get trapped in there. Maybe that affects the wind coming in and out. But that's opinion. We can't write that. Okay. For this diagram, again, this is a fairly easy one to describe the main features because we're looking at the really obvious differences between warm and cool climate housing. And pretty much every student I've ever asked will say, they're a different shape. Particularly the roof is a different shape. So in warm climate, the high point of the roof is in the middle, whereas in cool climate is on one side that is facing the sun, with the lower side, the other side of the roof away from the sun. Also, in the cool climate, there is only windows on one side of the building, whereas in a warm climate, they have the windows on both sides of the building. So this one is about just comparing the most obvious differences. After you've compared those differences, you might look at some differences in materials. This has thermal building material, whereas this has a lot less thermal building material. The cool climate has insulation all around the house, whereas in warm climate, it only has insulation on the roof. Now, if you don't know, thermal is just heat. So normally about trapping and keeping in heat. And insulation is what traps and keeps in heat. So it's winter in Australia, I'm wearing a jacket. It is an insulation. It keeps the heat in my body in winter. If there's any other words you don't know, don't worry. Again, you're not going to see this diagram in the IELTS test. Okay, so don't worry too much about vocabulary here you don't know or don't understand. Okay, so by now, diagrams are pretty simple. In fact, diagrams, maps, flowcharts, I think they're all pretty simple. We're basically doing that thing that we talked about earlier. We start by describing the main features, and then we might describe the process, or in this situation, the differences, the other smaller differences between the two houses. So if you do get a map, a diagram, or a flowchart, don't panic. You should be like, yes! They're actually, I think, one of the easiest things to report. Once you realize how to divide that BP1 and BP2, you shouldn't have too many more troubles. Okay, so combinations. This is quite difficult to talk about because there's so many different combinations. We have a bar chart or a column chart with a pie chart with a table, a bar chart with a line graph. There's so many different combinations. And it's difficult to really say what to describe in each one. That's up to you to work out. However, there are some things we're going to think about when we are describing a combination of different graphs. So the first thing we're looking for is some kind of connection, or and more specifically, a correlation. Remember, a correlation, if you're not sure, is kind of like if, say, if I don't brush my teeth, they will go yellow. Now, is the fact that I'm not brushing my teeth causing them to go yellow? Actually, no, it's not. It's the food we eat that makes it go yellow. But there is a correlation. Okay, it's not a cause, it's a connection, but there's a pattern in the connection, basically. So with this one, this is actually quite a good one. I like this one because you'll see that we have jobs that work different hours, and how many of those people suffer from stress-related illness. So basically, they get sick from stress. Now, in this situation, I want you to imagine you're a university student, you're studying this. So you're going to go out and interview people that do 8 different jobs and find out some information. Then you're going to go to the government Department of Medicine and Medical Records and look at the number of sick days and problems related to stress taken by people in these jobs. And you're going to look at the data. Now, probably the reason you're doing this is you might have a hypothesis. A hypothesis is when you say, I think this is true. Then you have to test, is it true? So most people will probably say, well, I think the jobs that work more hours and sorry, I did not write that. That is a typing mistake. That's meant to be hours, not horse. Um, but anyway, so I believe that the number of hours worked per week increasing would relate in more stress. That would be what I would expect. However, if we have a look at this, businessmen work the longest hours, but actually have like the 5th ranked stress. Lecturers, university teachers, have the lowest hours, but actually have the most stress. So we can say there's not a correlation between the number of hours worked and the job and the amount of stress-related illness. Okay. By the way, these numbers are made up. I don't think that's true, that lecturers have the most stress. But they just make up these numbers and statistics, so don't take them seriously. So when I'm looking at that, my main feature paragraph, I would actually say, when analyzing this data, it is clear that there is no correlation between working longer hours and suffering more stress-related illness. This can be seen by the fact that lecturers who have the fewest hours actually suffer the most stress, while businessmen who work the longest hours actually come 4th most stress. And actually, look at the other numbers, it's fairly random as well. There's a little bit of a connection. I think like from 1 to 8, I think 3 of the numbers match up between the two. Okay, so that might be the kind of thing I would report. In my BP2, I would just look for other patterns, like the fact that this one is 3rd most hours is the 3rd most stressful, and the 5th is, so which ones match up and which ones don't match up. So I'd say these jobs do match up to the position of most hours to most stress, whereas these ones do not. And that would be a nice, easy way to divide it. Now, sometimes there is no real correlation at all. So, for example, here we have films shown in the UK and Australia and where they are from, whereas this just shows how many millions of people watched films in the UK and Australia in different years. I mean, yes, they're both about films, but there's no other real connection. The only thing you might say is that this is this is 2001, and if we look at 2001, it's kind of the highest peak period in this line graph. So you might say that when looking at this data, we can see that over time, people have watched a lot more movies in the past, and that more people in the UK watch movies than Australia. The highest year of data of cinema admissions was in 2001, which is the year that we have from our data for the bar graph. And again, in the bar graph, you would you would then just have a separate paragraph pointing about the main feature in the bar graph and then the other features. So you could do it the other way around, but I just think it makes sense to point this out first and then draw our attention to this at the end of our BP1. So we do those basically going up over time. UK is more than Australia. This was the highest year. And that leads in very nicely to the next paragraph, where we say the data from this year shows this, particularly that American films were by far and away the most popular films in both Australia and the UK. In fact, they were more than all the other film types combined. That's a pretty simple kind of thing to talk about. So actually, before I move on, so really you're just thinking, is there a connection between them? If there's not, you would just have main feature, or you wouldn't have a main feature paragraph and then details. You'd have BP1, main feature about the first chart and then other details. BP2, main feature about the second chart and then other details. That's actually pretty simple to do. The real thing is just to look for, is there a connection or is there not a connection? Okay, guys, that's the end of our task 1 videos. Now, the videos we've done, if you take in all of that advice from those 4 videos, it really shouldn't be too hard to get your TA and your CC up to like 6, 6.5s and 7s. Now, we're not really doing a grammar focus in this video, even though we've looked at a little bit of grammar in some signposting, but just trying to cover the really important things that students have problems with. If you have any questions, please let us know, and I'll answer those in my 10th video in this course. Thank you very much, and I will see you very shortly in our next video. Bye-bye.